The Bob Murphy Show, episode 350.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Today I'm going to be joined by author Jason Fry, who is here to discuss his new book, National Divorce, A Plan for Peace. So this is something that, of course, has been on my mind lately. For those who don't know, I recently released a pamphlet, well, it's not too recently at this point, called Common Sense, the case for Texas independence. So I will link to that in the show notes page of this episode of The Bob Murphy Show if you haven't come across that. But big picture, it's been several years now since I decided the only chance I think for peace and a relative degree of liberty for current Americans in the next 20 years, let's say, is if one or more states breaks away from the Union, whether it's literally formal withdrawal or just de facto. That I don't think we're turning this ship by sending the right people to Washington. So Jason reached out to me. He said he's got a new book on this topic, and he hits things from a different angle than perhaps what you're used to hearing. So I think it'll be interesting, even if you've already listened to lots of people talking about this important topic. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Jason Fry on his new book, National Divorce, A Plan for Peace. Jason, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
Hey, glad to be here.
So you've got a book that's newly out. I don't know if for the people watching the video, do you want to hold it up so they can see? It is National Divorce, A Plan for Peace. Mm-hmm. And let me intrigue people with the thing that I have a blurb on it, folks, so I've seen it early. And that you had a line in there that I recycled for the blurb that I thought really encapsulates what you're doing with this book. And you say, the breakup is inevitable, but the chaos is not. So That's right. What do you mean by that?
So, I mean, if you look at America, things look a little sketchy, perhaps, right? So you got reds and blues, you've got liberals and conservatives, you've got those of us that just want to be left alone, you've got social issues going every which way. There's division everywhere. And that leads me to think that division is coming. But as I dive into in the book pretty hard, just because you break up doesn't mean you have to fight or have a civil war or whatever. So that's kind of what the book is about. So maybe we can just kind of lean into those divisions and come to the table and say, I would like to have it my way over here, and I'll let you have it your way over there. And that might be a peaceful way forward compared to Fort Sumner or something, right?
Exactly. So just to let me say something and you tell me if this is right. In contrast, perhaps other people writing about the topic of secession or national divorce even, were putting it forward as a normative thing, saying, hey, I think this is the best way forward. And what I thought was interesting about yours is you were saying this is coming. It's not like we're choosing between should all the 50 states stay in the Union or not. The breakup is coming, and then the issue is just, do we want it to be nice and orderly, or do we want it to kind of happen haphazardly, which is more likely to lead to violence and other unintended consequences?
Right. So for at least 10 years, I've been on the team of we should do this. Right? Mm-hmm. We should separate. We should go our own way. But honestly, it was the incident down at Shelby Park, down at the Rio Grande. You know that story? I'll fill it in for your listeners here. So back in February of this year, there's a park on the river.
So it's 2024, just for people who are listening later.
So spring of 2024, there was a park on the border, and the feds had, quote, air quotes, operational control of this area, and they were letting everybody and their cousin through. But it was a public park. And so the state of Texas did a little bit of legal research, figured out that they could, that the feds didn't necessarily have jurisdiction there. And so the state guard locked the feds out of the park and took over control of that crossing area. So what you had was well-meaning Texans on one side of a fence lined up against well-meaning Americans on the other side of the fence, right? And I don't think anybody was trying to escalate there, but it crossed my mind that we're one bad guy in the bushes away from something sketchy, right? It wasn't that I feel like anybody had intent there to cause an armed conflict, but the unintentional potential was certainly there, was the way I looked at it.
Now, is that the incident when the feds came in and they cut down the barbed wire and whatnot?
That's been going on. They've been messing with each other's barbed wire for 18 months. Texas put some buoys out in the river also, and they sued to make us take the buoys out, and we won that one. But this was just another skirmish in that ongoing standoff.
Okay. And
this was literally, we locked the feds out of the park that had the boat ramp, so they couldn't put their boats on the river in that section.
Okay. I actually did. I was sort of like doing a Gary Johnson. What is Aleppo? I actually didn't know that. When you said it, it didn't click with me what that you're referring to. Okay.
Right. Good. Well, they shouldn't have held that against Gary Johnson that bad anyway.
I mean, since we're going off on that tangent, I know everyone was dunking him, so I was not his fan during that cycle or anything. But on that one, I liked. He just was very nonchalant. Like, it didn't seem like he got nervous or like was ashamed. He's like, "What is it? Oh, yes, I know what you're talking about." You know.
Right.
So I actually. There was other reasons I didn't care for him in that cycle, but that particular one, I just thought, I mean, and then they kind of came at left field in Aleppo. I mean, it sounded like dog food.
Right.
So,
exactly.
Okay.
Anyway.
So maybe just to take a step back, you said you've been in support of this for a while. Maybe just, can you give us a little bit of your own background? And
Sure.
How did you come to this position that you find yourself in?
Right. So I grew up in Central Texas. I'm a fifth generation Texan with people down here since the 1850s. I have 4 sons. That's going to be relevant here in a minute. Been married a long time, I feel like I'm stable. I don't know. My wife may say otherwise. I was in church work for a while, was in retail for a while, and now I work in human services doing behavior stuff. Okay, that's as far as I'll go with that. So somewhere along the way in my current job, been there 16 years, we were the beneficiary / victim of some federal intervention. And it came, the way I framed that in my own mind was that the government of the most powerful country in the world cares what I write in one set of paperwork. Right. And that was it. It blew my mind. It's like, this was back in 2008, 9. I mean, we were still in Afghanistan. Some of the problems we have today weren't there yet, but the point hit me like a ton of bricks. It's like, of all the problems in the world, they want to mess with me. And I'm not even a bad guy. I'm just trying to do good, but they want to mess with my work product. And that really pushed me further libertarian, further non-interventionist, I guess, when they would intervene on behalf of the people that I work for, again, who need all the help in the world. No judgment there. But again, the fact that it was so out of proportion to me that the federal government would intervene at that level of detail. And so then every time somebody says the DOJ's investigating, I just cringe for those poor fools that think that they're going to get help out of that deal. But anyway, so somewhere along in there, I also found the Texas Nationalist Movement. I've been associated with them for a long time. I've written for them off and on for 10 years, roughly 7 years, something like that. Our mutual friend, Daniel Miller, wrote the foreword to the book. So it's a decent endorsement, right? So yeah. I've been one of those guys. But how do I get from there to here? So what was it? A few months ago, last year sometime, we had the Marjorie Taylor Greene spouting off about national divorce on television, and it kind of blew the rhetoric up a little bit. And those of us who've been working towards reasonable secession said, well, that's a slogan, not a plan. Like, that's dumb. You can't just, there's a guy named Bob Murphy, right, that used to say that there is no national marriage, right? So there's not a national divorce. I never agreed to this. You never agreed to this, right? I did quote you there in a book. I don't remember if that was from your Texas pamphlet or just something I heard on a podcast or something Daniel said, but hope I quoted you accurately.
You did quote me accurately.
Okay.
Off the top of my head, I can't remember if that's in the common sense thing I wrote or if that's just elsewhere. But yes, just real quickly, just for the listener, the idea. So this term national divorce has caught on. It's understandably catchy, and my objection to that term per se was, I was saying that to say that we need a divorce implies that Americans agreed to death do us part or something. And I was saying that no, there was nothing like that. So my point was, I think the threshold for when should you dissolve a marriage should be higher than this thing, because people entered into it voluntarily and pledged before God, in the typical ceremony. So anyway, that's a quibble, and that you were acknowledging, yes, in your book that I appreciated.
Yep. So national divorce is a slogan, not a plan, and it implies, maybe without any analysis anyway, it implies that this is some even more serious union than it really is. So what I tried to do with this book is take that national divorce rhetoric, because it's going to keep coming back. I mean, people are going to keep saying that, and take that and move it and join it kind of with the plans of some of the existing separation movements. So talking about how to get a bill through the legislature to empower a vote to set up a negotiation to set up a split, right? Not just some Tuesday we're like, peace, we're out of here, right? But rather a negotiated peaceful transition, similar to the Brexit process, as a chance to do things in a different way besides just fighting.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just in general, as you say, this is going to be a messy thing, and people, critics of Texas, let's say, just to keep it on the case of Texas for the moment, they'll bring up all sorts of stuff. Well, gee, what about Social Security and tax and their share of the federal debt, and what about the military bases that are and all that? And I was like, right, so that's why we should start talking about
it now.
Yeah, I'm not saying I have the solution to all those things, but we need to start talking about it. And maybe there's things I haven't thought of, but we won't know until we bring up. And like you're saying, let's not wait till the dollar crashes and there's terrorist strikes from whatever Iranian cells or something going off in shopping malls, or at least that's what we're being told on the 6 o'clock news is happening. Right. Let's not at that point say, maybe we should break away from Washington, because we don't want to be hitched to that wagon anymore. That's not the right time to do it. Let's start doing that now.
Let's not wait till the tanks are rolling to decide what to do about some of those things. So that's, I do take a swing at a lot of those issues, because again, that's the questions on everybody's mind. Is it going to be worth the hassle? Is it going to be worth the trouble? Are the problems going to be too big to overcome? And so I take a run at basic taxation. I talk about roads. I talk about healthcare. I talk about Social Security. I talk about national defense. Lean heavily on your buddy Ryan McMakin for that and his recent book in terms of the defense questions. But anyway, so yeah, that's the approach I've taken, is to say, oh, it's coming, guys. So here's some things to think about. I don't know the answers, because it's going to come out to negotiations that are a little bit unpredictable by nature, right? So
can I ask, before we dive into some of the particulars, which of course we're going to do here in a minute, but just in general, what's the flavor down there, the feeling? And I realize the circles you move in is probably
fair.
You're bumping into the people that are pro Texit and such, but like I know when I had Daniel Miller on, and he was talking about the Republican Party at the state level not wanting that question to come, the ballot measure to come up just even in the primary.
Right. There were some maneuvers to keep it off of the ballot.
And I asked him why they were doing that, and his quick answer was because they know it would pass overwhelmingly among GOP voters if they had it on there, and that would be embarrassing to them. So that was surprising to me, pleasantly surprising. So anyway, I'm just wondering, is it the thing where you think most Texans would want to do it if they thought it would be allowed? Or
it's hard to say. So in the Republican primary voter pool, Daniel's probably right. Okay, I think in the group of people that usually vote in Republican primaries, we would have a majority. That is a small slice of the electorate, right? And I think his perspective there is that the powers that be weren't willing to gamble because they thought that a large slice of their small slice would agree to it, and they weren't ready to go fight for it because they think the bigger picture is more complicated than that. I mean, that's the way I've understood what Daniel was saying. I actually have talked to a few of those guys, and some of them say they're not opposed to it in principle. They're not opposed to having a vote. They just couldn't pass it forward the way that it was coming. I don't know. It sounded like a cop-out to me, but they were sincere too.
But even there is reassuring that if the things behind closed doors that you're hearing in terms of this is why we had to slow walk it, it's not, well, what are you saying? You want slavery back? Or we would just get nuked on Thursday. What are you talking about? We're in favor in principle, but the way it was worded, that's
in the political circles that I travel in, which are small. I mean, I do have some acquaintances, but I'm a nobody yet. Working on it. There is some openness to discussing it. There is not much willingness to force it, right, in terms of putting it on the ballot. So Texas Nationalist Movement took a gamble. It was reasonably taken, but didn't pay off to try to challenge the election law a little bit about the way the signatures were gathered for a petition, because the law does say that electronic signatures count for everything business-wise, right? That's why I can buy a house on DocuSign, right? But the law also has some stuff that says it has to be a wet signature for voting, even though the other one says that government stuff can use. So there's this ambiguity, and because it's infinitely easier to collect online signatures than it is to collect paper ones, they took a gamble that we could win that in court in terms of arguing that the law says these kind of signatures are valid. We used DocuSign, and we actually had to handwrite something, even though it was electronic, to try to, cover some of those technicalities, right? We knew were coming. When it came down to it, we had more than enough signatures to put the issue on the ballot. Way more, like 30,000 more than we needed. But in the end of the day, election law, the way things were going, were not in our favor, right? So we pushed until we figured out we were not going to win, and we stopped spending money on lawyers on that issue.
Okay.
So, again, I think we were right in a lot of ways. We had a good case.
To summarize for the listener, so the idea was, I forget what the press, something in the 80s, right? Like there was something that you guys realized, by this measure,
I can
we're allowed with signature. Yeah, go ahead.
So once upon, Texas doesn't have a referendum process, right? There is no way to, other than constitutional amendments, to just put a question out there on the vote, except that the parties are allowed to put advisory questions on their primaries, right? And so Republicans have done 10 of those for a long time. Like, should we abolish the property taxes? Should we have school choice? I mean, they'll pick some issues that they want to do a very, very formal poll on, right? And ask the actual primary voters. There is a never used provision in the election law that if you get the right number of signatures, you can force a question onto those preliminary questions. That makes sense.
Yep.
So this would not have been a Texit vote. This would not have been anything but a very formal poll of the exact voters of the Republican primary. And again, it's based off of a percentage of the number of people that voted in that election last time or something. The number there's not a fixed number, but I think we're 9 months past that. Hopefully I can quote the numbers right, but I think it took about 90 or 95,000 signatures to meet that threshold. And we had about 130,000 signatures.
Okay.
That
so that's why Daniel Miller was saying we have more than enough to get
correct.
This on
Correct.
And again, for folks, it's not that in November it was going to be on the ballot. It was just for
correct. It was going to be on the March ballot as a question alongside should we abolish property taxes and blah blah whatever.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so that it wouldn't have been binding or anything. But
no,
again,
and it wasn't intended to be binding. It's intended to push or force the hand of the Republican Party to actually follow their own platform.
So the powers that be that run the Texas state level GOP kept that off, and they argued, no, it has to be wedding signatures. You guys didn't get the threshold.
So there were multiple stages. I think we They voted on it in a committee. We lost that vote 60-40, so not 90-10.
Right.
It was close. We had people in the room. You don't charge the castle unless you know how many troops you got, right? So,
Right.
so we lost that vote, and then it's at the chair's discretion whether or not to include it. And so that was Mr. Matt Rinaldi. Anyway, he was not willing to stick his neck out for that. Again, we could make the case, and he could make the case too. That wasn't the
Yep.
point. The point was he didn't have the guts to do it. That's what it amounted to. He hid behind a technicality.
Okay.
And again, there's plenty of reasons all of us might do that sometimes. Not challenging his character or anything, but in this particular case, I'll say he was not willing to take the step.
Okay. So that's how things are there. So let me ask then, for you, the book, are you thinking more regions would break off, or are you mostly focused on Texas, or how do you picture that?
So I believe that every state has the right to have a government that suits itself, right? So, I support the New Hampshire folks. I support the Greater Idaho. I support Alaska. I even support Cal-Exit. I don't care if the lefties go make a left side. That's fine. We all, that's kind of the libertarian showing in me a little bit. Not as technical as you guys, but we all have that fundamental right to self-determination. And so if I'm arguing that Texas has that right, well, golly, so does South Dakota, right? And so when feeling like this national divorce rhetoric is not a Texas divorce, right? It's a national issue. I wanted to put this strategy of legislation and politics and negotiation out into the larger field, right? So that, again, some grumpy person from Idaho might say, well, how are we going to do this? Oh, here's a book, right? And get a strategy that's not preppers and AR-15s and things, right? Nobody needs that.
Okay. So I guess maybe we'll jump in. I do want to make sure I hit, so why don't we just go ahead and do it right now?
Yeah, sure.
Your chapter 19, a special chapter for Christians.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Do you want to explain what
yeah,
made you
sure.
put that in there?
Sure. So I have a master's in Bible. I was a minister before. Mm-hmm. And so it kind of falls into my wheelhouse to talk about those things. And honestly, that's my network. That's my people. I went to a Christian college. So personally, I came across the idea of, let me sum up evangelical challenges in 5 seconds, right? So divorce is bad, right? Right. And so if I'm arguing for divorce here, what does that mean in terms of good and bad and right and wrong, right? And so I took it from that angle. I also looked at, again, from a fairly conservative tradition, what does the Bible say about that? What does the Bible say we should do? What examples are there? Are there commands that we should follow here? And so I dug into some stories. A couple of big ones come to mind. So Abram and Lot, they said, man, we got too many sheep. There's not enough room here for all of us. How about let's pick and we'll split? And Lot says he wants to go that way, and Abram says he wants to go that way. And so they go their separate ways. They still have contact. Abram saves Lot's family later. But anyway, there's an example of two people that said, there's not enough resources here for us. They're even family. Mm-hmm. And they chose to split peacefully. There's one. The other one would be, the kingdom of Israel had 12 tribes. And after Solomon died, they split into 10 and 2, into two nations, a nation of Israel, a nation of Judah. So I talk about that a little bit. That one's funny. Not in good ways, because it's so dadgum familiar to what we're doing right now. Right. So you have this nation that's together. God tells a prophet to tell the usurper, you're going to end up with 10, right? So before we even have the first discussion, the guy leaving knows he's going to win, sort of. Don't know how it's going to go, but God has promised that he's going to end up with.
And he's going up against Solomon's son, right?
Correct. So it's Rehoboam is Solomon's son, and Jeroboam is the other guy. And so Jeroboam, has the ear of the people. The people are talking to him and saying, man, you've been too hard on us. We need to take, there's too much taxes, too much government, whatever. And then Rehoboam took the opposite approach. So he listened to all the old guys who said, yeah, that's probably right. Do that, chill. But then he listened to all his young friends who said, no, man, you're the king. Do it the way you want. Kick their butts, man. You can do what you want. And so you kind of have this populist up against this authoritarian. Is what it amounts to. It's a good thing we've never had that. And in that scenario, the nation splits, and the authoritarian decides, well, golly, we can't do that. I got to raise an army and go get them. And God intervenes with a prophet and says, nope, I split them on purpose. You stay home. And so in that one, again, kind of weird to me, but God intervened to start the split and perpetuate the split and keep it from being violent. So I believe a piece of my faith is that if God could do it, God still can. Don't know that he will. Couldn't tell you. But that's why I dive into that. There's also all my family's coming home if you hear elephants rumbling in the background. There's also a flavor of Christian nationalism out there. And so I figured those folks might benefit from a little actual scripture exposition on that topic. So that's where I went. I just wanted to look at it from those angles.
Yeah. What's interesting too is, so I know exactly why you went there, and I'm glad you did, because yes, I have encountered that there are some people that think you're really doing something sacrilegious. Oh no, the U.S. that's God. God bless this country, and who are we to just throw it because we can't get along with each other, and we're just going to throw it all away and all the sacrifices that all those brave men did, over the years and the various wars and whatnot. So I get where they're coming from, but yet at the same time, a lot of those same, especially evangelicals, will say what a cesspool the current United States is in our culture and everything. It's like, so
which way would
maybe, you like? The remnant should split away from them and separate and say, yeah, let's not associate with those people and let them trans our kids and whatnot. There's that argument as well.
Right. And so kind of as a libertarian-ish guy, my final answer on that subject is the Bible seems to allow it. I don't say the Bible says you should. That's kind of somebody's interpretation. But my conclusion of that chapter anyway was there does seem to be some biblical precedent for peaceful separation of nations. So,
folks, let's take a break from the action for this special announcement. Time is running out, and I mean that in two senses. First, look at the world. Things are spiraling out of control. Your time to prepare for this is running short. The second sense is your time to get ready for the ExPat Money Summit is also running short because it occurs on October 7th through 11th. So hurry up and get ready for it. What is the ExPat Money Summit, you say? It's the world's largest offshore event. It's put on by Mikkel Thorpe, host of the ExPat Money Show. So this, to be clear, is entirely online. Again, October 7th through 11th. If you attend the seminar, you're going to see why international diversification is a must for those looking to preserve their liberty and wealth. You're going to learn everything you need to know about getting your Plan B up and running, such as acquiring a second passport, diversifying your finances offshore, investing in international real estate. And you're going to get in-depth insights on geopolitics from world-renowned experts. These include people like Ron Paul, Doug Casey, Scott Horton, Tom Woods, Mark Faber, and Tom Luongo. Now, I'm going to be participating as well. I'm on a VIP panel devoted to the topic of de-dollarization and, the pace with which we might expect that and some of the complications arising from it and ways that we think it may play out. To get your complimentary ticket, just go to expatmoneysummit.com. However, if you want to have access to the VIP panels, which includes me, you're going to have to go ahead and get the VIP pass. If you do so, make sure you use promo code Murphy to get a special discount. So again, the general event, it's free. Go to expatmoneysummit.com. But if you want to get the VIP pass, make sure you use promo code Murphy. Let's get back to the show. Okay, well, maybe now just jumping into some more of the standard topics here. You brought it up, so why don't we go ahead and hit it head on? What about national defense? Which, isn't Texas going to be a sitting duck for, I don't know who, China?
Right. So one angle to look at this is if the United States without Texas were a sitting duck, then might we also should have joined with Mexico and Canada already, right? Like if bigger is somehow better, shouldn't we have the biggest state possible? And why do we even need a Mexico and a Canada? Couldn't we all just be one big thing? Again, it's the opposite argument, but it makes the point that feels silly.
Right.
It feels silly to say that. And it makes it feel silly to me to say that, Texas, as roughly the 10th largest economy or 9th, depending on the day in the world, is going to somehow need this extra layer of protection or something, right? We're still isolated by oceans from all of those guys. We're still next door neighbors to the United States. Mexico doesn't have nuclear weapons. They kind of live under the umbrella of the United States. So in a peaceful separation scenario, would you need a large national defense for each breakaway state? And I say no. A couple of reasons. One would be, the United States spends about 3.5 or 4% on national defense, if I remember right. And the world average is about 2%, right? So we're spending almost 1.5 times as much money on defense as anybody else in the world. So would any other new country need to spend the max, right? So could Texas reduce its defense spending to even the world average? Do we have to replicate the United States spending habits? I think their spending habits are part of the reason we want to leave, right? So I take that angle in the book anyway, is that, we already have big neighbors.
Yep.
We also are fairly isolated. There's no, it'd be like us invading Taiwan to piss off China. Like there's no reason one of those guys would want to come mess with us. Because even if we just broke up last week, our ex-girlfriend, our ex-boyfriend is going to be pissed, right? So that's the argument I take, is that, another angle is that the reason the United States has such a huge military presence is because we use it everywhere except for on our own business, right?
Mm-hmm.
So an independent Texas wouldn't have to care if Israel and Iran are blowing each other up. Not on day one anyway. We might get to a point where we want to contribute to some stuff in the world, but that's not a requirement initially, that we have a international capable military. So that's the approach I take there.
Yeah, and just logistically, to me, it's somebody who's worried about some foreign country physically invading Texas. I get just they have access to oceans on both sides, so even if they got blockaded on one side, they got the whole border with Mexico. So
yeah,
that's just not.
There's no practical reason to do that.
The amount of private gun ownership in Texas, just the idea of somebody coming in and conquering them and holding it hostage for this, that's so,
doesn't make a lot of sense.
So now let me flip it though. The one military threat to Texas that I do think is quite plausible is from Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And so then that's the other objection is people say, yeah, that'd be nice, but look what happened the last time a bunch of southern states.
Oh, I love that argument because it's so stupid. Okay, let's see. Which angle should we take first? Let's take first the angle of how did that work for you last time? So that is the exact same argument as a wife beat her husband who says, I almost killed you last time you tried to leave. And if you try to leave again, I'm going to beat you so bad that you're dead. I'm going to just kill you if you try to leave me. Right. And what do we call that? We call that abuse. We call that criminal if you actually do it. Right. Nobody pretends like that's how a relationship is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. So when somebody says, well, what about the Civil War? All they're really saying is, I'm a terrible spouse and I'm going to kill you again. Right. Why would you want to stay in that relationship? Right. The fact that that's their first argument illustrates how terrible it is.
Yeah. And I just, for me to just extend that, and I've read the manuscript. I think you say this, but my take on that too, just if you're right, if somebody says that, I latch onto that and I don't try to, I say, okay, let's just go with that. And so if you're saying your primary reason that secession is a bad idea is that Washington would drop bombs on those people, then surely you can agree this is not a voluntary relationship. That's not right. Government consent of the governed. Mm-hmm. And maybe you're right. If you're correct, then maybe that means we should be quiet about it, but still we should be doing it more hush hush. Just like if your female friend confided to you that her husband beat her and everything, and you said, why don't you leave? And she says, I really think he might, do something really bad to me. And so
Yeah, you should
maybe
be
that
helping those people.
right. So maybe that means
Yeah.
like if she's serious,
Mhm.
maybe that means okay, then yeah, just play it cool for a while. You know, don't let him know that you were talking to me about this. But it doesn't mean you just say, okay, I guess you're married to him forever. That's
Right.
not what you
Right.
would say. Whereas that's what's so
Absolutely
weird
not.
about the people
Mhm.
saying Civil
Mhm.
War. They think that they just ended the conversation when, like, no, at the very least, that just means we should be a little bit more discreet in how we,
Mhm.
think about these issues. So,
Mhm. Mhm. So that's one angle. The other angle they take sometimes is Texas versus white. I'm sure you're familiar with these arguments. So after the Civil War, a Supreme Court made up of 5 justices put in by Lincoln, plus a few more, decided that the winners should keep the money. And oh, by the way, the losers had no right to leave in the first place. Okay. I chose those words carefully. That was a case about money. It was a case about the winners wanting their money back. And oh, by the way, they threw in an issue about secession. I'm not a super fan of the Supreme Court because they flip flop on stuff all the time. A nice, good example is Roe v. Wade. Oh, this is the law of the land. Oh, wait, never mind. We missed it last time. There's some fun ones that they have never overturned that nobody would say are precedents now. Buck v. Bell is a good one, that the state has the right to sterilize people that they decide are feeble-minded. Again, using the terms from the early century, but they never overturned that. That's still the law, but nobody's going around arguing that should occur because it's still the law, right? So, kind of the way I come down to that is, if I'm ready to leave, I'm not asking the Supreme Court of some other country what they think about it, especially not what they thought about it 150 years ago. I feel that case is largely irrelevant, except for when they bring it up as if it somehow trumps the legal arguments, right?
yeah.
So,
Okay. Well, what about those? So that you're acknowledging about the
I got another angle.
legality.
Yeah, that's what it was. It took me a second to get there. So if Texas, let's just say, again, that's my home state. I'll use Texas examples. South Carolina has the right to do this. So does Nevada and everybody else. But if Texas said, we're out, and then we put all our guys and we took Fort Hood and all the stuff in Fort Hood, and then we set up roadblocks at all the exits to Texas into the United States. And we said, we're really out. This is ours. We own it now. You can't come in. How do you respond to that? They respond to that with bigger guys and bigger guns and bombs and things, right? That's a military act of taking territory. That's what, Russia has done to Ukraine. That's what Iraq did to Kuwait. It wasn't diplomatic at all. It was, I'm holding this territory now. That's the way you start a war. So what we're proposing amongst all the separatists is not that at all. It's voting. Right? So for the United States to respond with tanks to voting would be fairly out of character, right? There's no violence implicit in voting, or, I mean, you can argue that you can argue all things about voting, but from the reactionary perspective, they have no justification on which to use force.
Certainly, it would be tricky for the people that always tout democracy.
Correct.
To say we don't like the way the people in Texas voted, and so we're going to send in troops. Like that would be
it's completely irrational. So the United States, if they had good values, we wouldn't be trying to leave, but they would at least have to flip on their own values to pursue that way. And you could say, maybe that was the flaw in the previous iteration, is that, there was this issue over who owns Fort Sumner, and then they started shooting guns at each other, right? We don't have to do any of that. I think I say in the book that the war never starts if nobody starts firing. I said today on my X feed that World War III only starts if world powers get involved. Right? Yeah. I don't care what all those people over there do. They can fight. People have fought for centuries, millennia. But it only becomes a world war when world powers get involved. So again, I think there's no reason why force should be the response of the United States, unless they're bad actors. But if they're bad actors, that just confirms our position that we needed to get out.
Yep. okay, you've got two chapters. One, it's 17's the tribes on the left, and then 18's the tribes on the right.
Yeah.
What's going on with those distinctions?
Okay, so Pat Buchanan had a book a few years back talking about the problem with the United States is tribalism. Like everybody's just hanging out with people they agree with, and that makes it worse. I took the opposite approach, saying actually that's sort of the way humanity has been forever, and it's only in the last few centuries that we've had these mega monster administrative units, right? The fact that there's a United States that covers most of a continent, or there's a Russia that covers most of another continent, right? These huge empires are a modern phenomenon. And really, me and my homies is kind of the way humanity has always been until now. And so I say, the answer is not that the tribes don't get along. It's that there's this overarching thing trying to force all the tribes to be the same. And they're not. Humanity's not that way. So one of the key points of that angle is that the problem with tribalism isn't tribes. It's the use of aggression between tribes, right? So my tribe is clearly the best, and so I must kill you to make you do it my way. Or I must change the law to make my preferences be the law in your place.
And this should appeal to the Christians we talked about earlier because it's the 12 tribes of Israel, right?
Right.
So it's not
That too. But no, so I'm thinking more like, again, like Africa or Native American, or just groups of people with common interests and common welfare in mind, working for each other. I think Matt Gibbs says it takes a village, but a village is made of people who choose to live there. Right. I mean, there's this voluntary association that is lost when you're forced under one huge government. So another piece of how to pull that off nonviolently is that you have to understand that all those crazy guys over there are not crazy. And they also think you're crazy, but you're not crazy either. Right. So I kind of go through this construct of, these are where some of the guys on the left are coming from. Like, this is the good idea that they started with and why it's real and why it's good. Now, this is where it falls apart, but they're not insane. And then I do the same thing with the right. I say, well, this is where this group on the right comes from. This is why they fight so hard for this. They're not wrong, but they're kind of mean. And this is why it falls apart. Right. The whole thing about he thinks his poop doesn't stink, right? Everybody's got their own problems. Nobody's tribe is perfect, even if it works well for us. So I take a couple of chapters looking at what do they over there think from all the different perspectives, right? I want to cover quite a few different and again, make the point that they, whoever they are not crazy. They just want what's best for their kids, just like the rest of us.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought for a while, just looking on Twitter, or X as they call it nowadays, if your stance is, if I can find people on the other side of me on an issue who are awful people and stupid, then you're always going to be right. And like, for example, I can understand extreme feminists, for example, because there are some guys, or at least accounts, maybe it's teenagers screwing around, but who just post really awful comments. There's anti-Semitic people posting really,
there's terrible people in every single group.
And so, yes, you can go see that if you want to go see it, but that doesn't then mean, so since you're arguing against those people, therefore you must be right in all your policy positions. That no, because there could be reasonable people on the other side.
Correct.
That
Correct.
kind of thing.
Correct. So good controversial example. So now let's use a simple one. Let's not stir the pot. So once upon a time, the United States decided alcohol was evil. And so they passed a constitutional amendment where nobody could drink alcohol anymore. Right. Really, that should have been a local decision. That should have been Bob deciding if Bob wants some alcohol, right? But they meddled in this social issue to the point that that they changed the law to have their preferences codified. How well did that work out? How long did that last? 20 years tops? Not even that long.
Nobody in the United States took a drink for that.
Yeah, I'm sure they just totally quit. Yeah. Totally. I mean, there was no. Yeah, I'm sure it was great.
Al Capone just said, "There's nothing we can do."
Yeah, but it worked so great that they're like, "Oops," and they undid it. Right. That's a decent way to illustrate that the problem is not the issue. The problem is that the government meddled in the issue. right? That some group tried to make the law enforce their preferences. So that's the antidote to violence and tribalism. Is like, as a Texan, let me pick on California. It's fun. As a Texan, I don't care if California wants to, have abortions on the street corner next to the homeless guys, because I don't live in California. Right? But I also expect California not to care if I don't want anybody killing unborn babies in my neighborhood. Right? So that tolerance of other perspectives comes from, to me, a little bit of understanding of where they're coming from. You have to know that they're not crazy. They're not insane. They just believe differently than you do.
Yep. And just to allow for that self-sorting will ease the tensions that,
yes.
And I think that kind of goes back to what you said earlier, that
yep.
It's not merely a principled thing, but just in general also to say hey, we want Texas to be this mecca for the people we kind of think of as a right wing or conservative or have traditional values and whatnot.
I've had people, Texas isn't going to be a libertarian utopia. Okay, I mean, I'm not arguing that it should be,
but it could more, like if California and other places they break away, and so then it does get more into different area, then people can just go where they want. And
that's the idea. The other angle that I took, because Texas is very diverse, honestly, we are a microcosm of the current politics of the world, where we have multiple large cities that vote one way and this other huge piece of territory with less people in it that vote the other way. Right. My argument is that I'm more likely to make a deal with my neighbors than I am with people on the other side of the country. Right. So even if Austin thinks it should be one way and Lubbock thinks it should be the other, we're closer to each other. We can treat each other better. We're closer culturally. We're not a they. It's different than if California and New York are trying to influence Texas politics. It's us talking to ourselves. So that's kind of the approach I take. It's optimistic. I mean, I'll admit, but I kind of believe that we can figure it out better if we have less people telling us how to figure it out. So that's the approach I take.
Just along those lines, you said something earlier that I thought was pretty illustrative of this, when you were talking about the standoff in the park between the Texas National, and you said something like, so on one side of the fence you had Texans, and on the other side you had Americans. I think most people from other states wouldn't talk like that. They wouldn't say on the one side you had people from Idaho, and the other hand Americans, because people in Idaho think of, whereas Texas they really do think. And I just know that because when I was down there teaching, and I was talking to somebody, and they said, "Oh yeah, when we travel abroad in Europe, and people say, where are you from?"
Yeah, you don't say United States.
You say I'm from Texas. Whereas I wouldn't have said to people, "I'm from New York."
Right. So
the state meaning that maybe if I was from New York City, but
I would say I'm a Christian Texan American in that order. Is kind of the way I usually phrase it. I mean, I've got my principles, and I've got where I'm from, and then also there's this other thing, kind of where I'm from. Is the way I think about it.
So speaking of which, this is something that I get occasionally, is people will say, okay, smart guy, if Texas breaks away, well then why wouldn't Austin and Dallas break away, and it would splinter up into 1,000 little things? And what, how would you argue against that? Or what do you feel about that?
I would say, okay.
That's what I say.
All right. Cool. More power to them. The impulse to build these huge empires is recent. Like, I haven't heard anybody say Luxembourg has no right to exist because they're too tiny, right? Well, the Cayman Islands, golly, they're just some islands. They're in the middle of the ocean. They don't need to be a nation, right? So, I mean, I don't go quite so far as Rothbard, that the individual has every, I'm not my own country. But me and the people around me ought to have some say in how our government works. And so, again, I don't have any theoretical problem with, Lubbock as a country, or Austin as a country, or breaking up into as many units as it takes for each of us to be able to move to a unit that suits us. Yep.
And like Switzerland didn't get invaded in either of the world wars, and people, it's like, well,
and they're an interesting example because they are super diverse, and they've built this system of breaking the groups up anytime they don't get along. Yeah, they're like the ultimate federalists. I didn't intend for this to be to match their approach, but it sort of does. The the idea that you should have it your way over there, as long as you let me have it my way over here. And then we'll cooperate on the bigger issues, but there aren't very many of those.
Yeah. Okay. Let me end with this question.
Yeah.
Hopefully it doesn't catch you off guard. So you've obviously been listening to, I've got my book, Tom Woods has got his thing, Daniel Miller's got his. So this is now, Michael Malice talks about national divorce. What do you think, what's the one aspect of this that you think we are missing, or just in general, the popular discussion among right-wing libertarianish type people? Is there some key thing that you think we're overlooking that you say, hey, we should really focus on this?
I don't know about that. I mean, y'all are smart folks, man. I don't think I invented anything exceptional, but I did take a couple of angles differently than a few of those. So Daniel Miller is exceptionally devoted to Texas independence, but I believe New Hampshire and Kalamazoo everywhere has that right. And so my focus is a little broader than Miller. Ryan McMakin wrote an exceptional book about smaller units being better, but he did a lot of really good technical, precise research. And I've been to grad school. I can read that stuff, but no, a lot of people don't like it. So again, I didn't go that way. This is kind of the primer to what it might look like. I intentionally took an angle of, let's explain this with metaphors and simple concepts. Tom Woods, again, has the OG National Divorce book. Good for him. That's cool. But that book is a collection of podcasts. Like, there's no sources cited in there. It was good hustle getting it out, but it doesn't go deep. And so, again, that's kind of how I see I fit in the mix. Okay. Again, you've taken a stab at it with 20 pages. Cool. But, so that's how I see it. I'm trying to expand it to not just one locale. I'm trying to expand it to not just, talking heads and PhDs. I'm trying to expand it to not just cursory with no, well, I said, and then he said, but with a little bit of depth to it. I mean, that's kind of the angles that I've taken on some of those other ones.
Okay. Well, great. So
that's how I would say.
Okay. Well, thanks. Good. So where can people go if they want to get their hands on this?
So I have autographed copies at national-divorce.com. If you just do national-divorce.com, you get Tom Woods. Again, great guy. no hard feelings, but he left the dash one open. No, so I got national-divorce.com. You can buy books directly from me there. I'm also on Amazon and Kindle. I'm working slowly on an audiobook. It seems to me not to be a great idea to step out into the politics world in somebody else's voice, right? So I'm going to record it so that it's at least me talking. But again, 4 kids and a day job and all kinds of stuff. We'll get there. But national-divorce.com or Amazon, Kindle also. So.
Okay, well, great. Can you hold it up again for the people watching the video?
Yeah, sure.
So the book is National Divorce, A Plan for Peace by Jason Fry.
Yep.
Jason, thanks so much for writing the book and taking the time to give this.
Yeah, and thanks for all that you've contributed to the discussion. I mean, I've quoted you some here without attribution in some of these concepts. Or I didn't invent all this. I synthesize it very well, But I'm just building on the shoulders of the other guys that have gone before and trying to broaden the message a little bit.
Well, I appreciate that, and that really is what we're trying to do here, right? That obviously,
absolutely.
When this happens, it's going to be because of thousands of people putting a lot more time and effort into it, and we're just trying to cascade it. And let me solve some of this stuff, and then maybe that'll inspire people to really, meet on Saturdays with their buddies and talk.
Yeah, if you and Ryan can convince the economists, and I can convince the church people, and Tom can convince the libertarians, and we can all work together. I mean, that's how it gets there. That's how you cross the line. It's by working together towards the same goal.
And again, just to summarize, I agree with you. This is coming, and the question is just, do we want it to be orderly and peaceful or not? And that's why we should plan for this. So,
so I have a couple of kids in the military. So, it's one thing to sit on the outside and kind of say, bye, but it's for me, it's more than that. I'm deeply invested in a peaceful outcome here. Like, I'm the most pacifist secessionist in the world because it's my kids that have to go straighten it out. Yeah. And not just if they get drafted, like they're really already there. Right. Exactly. And so I'm not interested in anything but a peaceful resolution.
Okay. Well, that's Pray that happens. So
Yes.
My guest, folks, has been Jason Fry. Jason, thanks so much.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. See you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.